All right, just a little bit now after 11 o'clock on Monday. It's June 1st, 2020. My name is Mike Hagan, and this is Radio Orbit. I'll be back with you all in just a few minutes.
48 ชั่วโมงในดิสโก้
There you go. Good evening, everybody. Good morning. Good day, whoever you are, wherever, whenever you might be listening. Welcome to the program. It is Radio Orbit. Still feeling great being back on the air. Last week was the first time in 10 weeks or so, and it still feels good. So yeah, live radio once again. Sure glad to be back in the studio and talking with y'all in real time. So yeah, Radio Orbit. Every Monday, we investigate the cutting edges in science, technology, nature, art, music, medicine, sometimes the strange and the unusual. Always interesting and usually pretty cool. You listen to it. It's Monday, the 1st of June, 2020. I hope you're all well out there and that the events and circumstances of the last few months and even the last few days haven't beaten you up too badly. These are strange days indeed, and I wish the best for everybody out there. I'm sure we'll talk about current events down the road tonight, but for now, welcome to the show. Hope things are good for you and you're enjoying the evening. It's a warm Monday night here in mid-Missouri, waxing gibbous moon. Right now, it'll be full in just a few days. Skies are pretty clear here after a nice weekend weather-wise, but a tumultuous weekend otherwise. Either way, take a look outside, out into the heavens, wherever you are. Maybe it'll provide some perspective. I like to do it whenever I can. All right, of course, it's once again a lovely night to curl up and listen into Radio Orbit. I mentioned last week a lot of people staying in as of late, and lots of people listen to the radio these days as well. I hope that's the case tonight. I'm glad you're all with me one way or the other. Let's take care of a few necessities, and then on to the show. All right, yes, as always, a big thanks to the truly amazing KOPN staff and volunteer crew making great radio for nearly 48 years, 24/7, 365, just an awesome collection of people that make it happen up here at the mighty fine 89. On Mondays, Woody gets us moving with traditional classic country and Ameripolitan music, more country than ever. From 3 to 6 p.m. with the Real Deal Country Show. I love Woody's show, and I listen every Monday because I am a new-found country radio fan. And by that I mean I've only found it in the last 5 to 7 years. I grew up with a lot of country music, listening to stuff that my dad would play and stuff, but I never really got a good grip on it. And I used to make fun of it, and I always thought it was sort of stupid. And, I don't know. I just never had a lot of respect for country music. Well, Woody changed all that a few years back for me. I'm now a major fan of primarily classic country, traditional country. I do like the new Ameripolitan scene, though, and Woody does a great job of providing all that stuff for us every Monday from 3 to 6. Excellent music and great conversation. Woody's always doing cool interviews with some of the guys and girls that are making music in that scene these days, and just a wonderful radio program. So anyway, Woody Adkins, also, he was the 2019 Ameripolitan Music DJ of the Year. Got to give Woody a shout out for that. Okay, that's 3 to 6 p.m. every Monday. At 6 o'clock, the Tech Radio guys take over. We have a good crossover between Tech Radio and this program. A lot of the stories that I'll do in the news oftentimes might be something that would be covered on Tech Radio as well, but those guys doing a great job. Tonight, Tech Radio, 6 o'clock until 7. Kelvin, Inspired tonight. Got to tip the hat to Kelvin. Jazz plus blues equals humans and robots. And just concluding New Wave Radio Theater. We heard Dick Gregory, just some wonderful insight and great comedy at the same time. Appreciate Kevin putting that together. Awesome stuff, good music, good news, good talk. 89.5 on the dial and streaming all around this nutty planet at www.kopn.org. It's your imagination station. It's KOPN Columbia. All right, big thanks to all of you for listening and participating in the program. I sure appreciate the feedback. You know how to do it. Email, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Hello to everybody out there. Cheers. Keep up the communication. It's imperative these days. I love hearing from you, and doesn't matter what you've got on your mind. Okay, always feel free to message me, whether it's a potential guest or maybe a musical artist that you'd like to see featured, maybe a topic you'd like to hear covered, maybe you have some art, some poetry you'd like to share. All of the above, whatever, please feel free and open to send any and all of that stuff to me, okay? All right, last week it was just you and me getting reacquainted. It was the first time I was back on the air in quite some time, and it was great to be here, and we just kind of eased back into it. Talked a lot about coronavirus, COVID-19, and what it's been like living in the world since all of this strangeness began a few months ago. We did space weather for the first time in a while, and we had a very interesting call from our friend Spencer out there in Kansas City. If you missed the show last week, or any of the older shows for that matter, they're all on the web and available in the archives at the website. It's www.mikehagan, MikeHagan, MikeHagan.com. The archives for the show, music archives are there. Oh yeah, we had some interesting sort of synth pop music last week from a band called Damaged Bug, and you can find them on the web in the music archives if you're looking for information about the band that was featured last week. Okay, all that's available on the web. One last thing, you might consider checking out the Radio Orbit forum. Of course, you can get there right from the website as well. Just click on the little button that says Orbit Forum, and you can post questions or stories or comments, or there's a chat room there, and you can send direct messages. We've got over 200 people participating now over there, so I sure appreciate the new members, and hello, and thanks for joining the gang. Okay, tonight, a thought-provoking interview with Dr. Sven Nyholm. Dr. Nyholm is an assistant professor of philosophical ethics at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. He has a new book out that's called Humans and Robots. It's a good one, and you can learn more about it in a few minutes. I was introduced to Dr. Nyholm through Dr. David Gunkel, who I was so pleased to have on the show back in September of last year, and their work is certainly related. David has a book that was released last year called Robot Rights, another fascinating read. And while I'm at it, I might as well say hi to John Danaher out there, and Maria Accente, and Mark Kirkelberg, and Beth Singler, and Gregor Wohlbring. Dr. Gregor Wohlbring, he's up in Ontario, but he's a remarkable man who just wrote a new paper that I linked up on Twitter. I need to put that up on the forum, but it has to do with the relationship between COVID-19 and the disabled. And he has pioneered a sort of new field of studies in science and philosophy and ethics that he calls ability studies. And it's fascinating. I had the great pleasure and privilege to interview Dr. Wohlbring a few months back, and I'd love to get him back on the air. But anyway, a wonderful paper just released in the last maybe week or so by Dr. Gregor Wohlbring. You might check that out on the Twitter feed or on the forum. I'll try to put that up in a little bit here, okay? Also, there's a woman who I was just introduced to named Carissa Veliz. Actually, Dr. Nyholm introduced me to her work, and I'm hoping to get in touch with her and have her on the program here as well. So anyway, if I'm missing anyone, they're all doing interesting and important work, and I'm sure pleased to have had a chance to talk with some of them and maybe some of the other ones that I mentioned down the road here. So anyway, check out that new paper by Gregor Wohlbring, and it's super interesting stuff from all of these folks. And we're going to get to it with Dr. Sven Nyholm in just a few minutes, okay? For the tunes tonight, we have music from the Netherlands as well. They're called Yin Yin, and they're cool. We started the show off with a tune called Disco Disco. I'm going to wet my whistle, and we're going to play another one from Yin Yin here, and then we'll come back with Dr. Sven Nyholm. All right, this is a song that is called 1 Inch Punch. You're listening to it. It's Yin Yin, Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. Back in just a few minutes.
water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
You're listening to Radio Orbit with Mike Hagan on KOPN 89.5 FM.
It's true. You are listening to Radio Orbit, and my name is Mike Hagan. Dr. Sven Nyholm is an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Utrecht University. That's in the Netherlands. Dr. Nyholm's work focuses on the ethics of automated driving, human-robot collaboration, deep brain stimulation, and disability and the goods of life. He's especially interested in how robotization and other types of automation affect traditional human values, as well as in questions raised by new technological developments. He has a new book out entitled Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. It's a profound read, and we're going to learn more about it with Dr. Sven Nyholm right about now. Before we get going, I do just want to say thank you. I'm real thrilled to have the chance to talk to you. I think your work is real important and super interesting, and I'm sure glad that I have a chance to talk with you today, Doctor.
Well, thank you.
Very good. Let's start off with a couple of questions about your background. First of all, where are you located? You're up in is it the Netherlands or somewhere in Scandinavia? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the Netherlands. I mean, that's not Scandinavia, but it's south of Scandinavia. And I work at the university in Utrecht.
And that's the University of Technology at Eindhoven. Is that correct?
No. So I was working up there for the last 4 years, but then November of last year I transferred, 15 minutes north to Utrecht, where I now work.
I see. Okay.
The Utrecht University.
Could you tell us a little bit about the nature of your work at the university there?
Yeah, so it's a bunch of different things, and so everything from my own research, writing academic articles, books, and supervising master students, PhD students, teaching courses, and being on various committees and things like that. So juggling on many different things at the same time, basically.
All right. How about a little bit about your background so people kind of get a feel for how you came to get involved in ethics of technology and some of these other related fields?
Sure. So, well, I grew up in Sweden, and when I was in high school, it was possible to take a philosophy course, which I did. And I didn't really have a sense that I understood what it was all about, but I did get a good grade in that course. And my teacher sort of encouraged me to study some more philosophy when I went to college, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
And from there on, I was very pleased to be encouraged by my teachers who said, you should study more philosophy and continue on with this, which I did. And I ended up doing a PhD. I actually started in Sweden at Gothenburg University, but then I transferred over to the University of Michigan. And I did a PhD there where I studied primarily ethics, and I wrote a dissertation about Kantian ethics, so the sort of the history of ethics and ethical theory. But then in my first job, which was over in Germany in Cologne, I started doing more research on sort of applied ethics issues, and I've always had an interest in how sort of scientific developments, technological developments, how they challenge the traditional philosophical questions. So, philosophers have always talked about things such as free will, what is it to be a human being, are we essentially mental, psychological beings, are we essentially animals, some kind of mix of the two? And those kinds of questions, I feel like sort of every time period have their own scientific and technological developments, where we have to kind of reassess our previous views on these things. So in a way, the same questions popping up about, free will, moral responsibility, how should we treat each other, what's a good life, what's the meaningful life. But, today, for example, we have automation, we have robots, we have AI, and that's, again, raising a lot of questions that, maybe we should rethink what it is to live a meaningful life as a human being.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about the history of ethics, and then a little bit about the history of ethics in relation to technology.
Sure. The history of ethics, in a way, the way it begun was obviously in classical antiquity with the ancient Greeks and Romans. And for them, the basic question of ethics was how to live a good life. And so there were different conceptions of happiness. You had Aristotle with the idea that happiness is to kind of fully live out and realize human potential, to develop various virtues and excellences. And then, of course, there were other schools, such as the Epicurean school, where happiness, tranquility of mind was the main ideal. And that was really the main question back then, like what virtues do you need to live a good human life, and how can you achieve happiness? Later on, during the Enlightenment, you had a kind of switch where ethics became much more inspired by sort of legal reasoning and legal thinking, where, what kind of responsibilities do you have? What kind of duties do you have? And you be held accountable for? And so also, in the philosophy, for example, of Immanuel Kant, you have ideas such as, you should follow a principle that you would be willing to lay down as a universal law. Again, you have these kind of legal metaphors. You have the idea of human dignity. That was already part of ancient thinking, but really now putting that in terms not of what is it to kind of live a dignified, good life, but rather how can you treat other people so that you respect their dignity. And it really wasn't until the kind of Enlightenment period in the history of ethics that people started saying, well, maybe we should treat everyone equally according to the same ethical standards. You also have, of course, the utilitarian tradition over in England, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, the idea that everyone should have a right to pursue happiness, and the ethical basic principle should be that we should kind of try to promote everyone's happiness to the greatest extent, and human suffering. And I guess that was during the time of the Industrial Revolution, that came a little bit later, but technology, in a way, started maybe coming into the discussion then, because, already then you had a certain amount of automation, people working in factories, questions about what that did to, the human worker. And, of course, Marx coming up later, a little bit later, with the idea of alienation, etc. He was interested in the idea of machines. Maybe humans become more like machines when they work in factories and putting things together, not really knowing, maybe they perform a very small task. They don't really know what the end result is going to be. They don't, they don't have any ownership, etc. And that was, according remarks, a very alienating process. When it comes to the kind of philosophy of technology that we see a lot of today, that's really very recent. I mean, so Heidegger, basically 100 years ago now, he started thinking about technology and had what is sometimes called the instrumental theory of technology.
Okay.
So the idea that, all technologies are basically tools, they're instruments that we use for our human, goals and aims. And of course, this is the theory that you would typically gravitate toward as a first pass, so to speak, at how to think about technology. But more recently, people have started to kind of question this idea. So from two directions, I guess you could say. So on the one hand, technology, it's not just a tool we use, it's also a prism, if you will, through which you kind of experience reality. It mediates our experience. And so, anything from, just wearing glasses and seeing better to, using social media to get information about the world or regular news sources. And that all affects what you know, what you don't know, how you think. And sometimes it's sort of implicitly without your knowing it. Sometimes you knowingly use certain technologies to kind of being able to experience things in a way that you couldn't otherwise. Again, things of glasses, a microscope, etc.
Yeah.
So technology also influences how we experience things and what we can do. So if you have modern technology, you can travel to space, you can go to the moon, you can do all sorts of things that you couldn't without technology. You can communicate with people in Missouri if you're in the Netherlands, and so on. So, you shouldn't only think about it as a tool, but you can also expand the horizon of things we can do and how we experience the world. So that's kind of one development in thinking about technology, not as a mere tool or instrument. But on the other hand, also people discussing ways in which people become attached to technologies. Of course, there's the more trivial examples of people, liking cars and giving them names, etc. But now that we have robots and AI that seemingly have they appear to people to have a kind of agency in the sense that we talk about self-driving cars, let's say, as making decisions. It's facing a fork in the road, and so the car has to decide to go left or right.
Right.
Even experts talk about this, talk about self-driving cars in these ways, not just lay people. We have humanoid robots. There's the case that is often discussed of Sophia, the humanoid robot,
Yes.
Created by Hanson Robotics, the company. And in 2017, Saudi Arabia declared that they had made Sophia into a honorary citizen.
Yes.
And that's really going beyond treating technology as a mere tool. It's now treated as a kind of a social presence that perhaps we should treat with some degree of moral, possibly make into honorary citizens, etc.
Well, you have a reasonably new book that's been released. It's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, so that's Humans and Robots. I'm very interested in the way that human beings react to or respond to robots and technologies. Again, the case with Sophia the robot is a good case in point. People, in a way, they're either sort of on Team Sophia, meaning that they approve of this idea of having a robot that looks like a human, talk shows, talking in front of the UN, etc. And others who say, well, this whole idea of a talking robot, it's really a kind of scam. It's a puppet, and this is misleading people about how far along AI has looked.
Yes.
And so it's a really kind of polarizing idea, this idea of building robots that look and act like humans. Some people think it's a great idea. Some people say, we will understand human beings better if we are able to create robots that look a little bit and act a little bit like human beings. Say this is a kind of road to delusion because, the AI is nowhere far near as far along as this sometimes suggests. So quite interesting how people react to robots of different kinds. Again, I mentioned the example of the self-driving car. People are excited about this. So this could be, some people are hoping that they find a car more environmentally friendly, convenient in all sorts of ways. But on the other hand, people also worry, when there are accidents, and of course, starting in 2016, people have been killed in self-driving cars. In 2018, it for the first time happened that someone was hit by an experimental self-driving car in Arizona. And then the question arises, so who should be held responsible if there is such a accident? The person in the car might say, I wasn't driving.
Yeah.
The car it's self-driving, so I shouldn't be held responsible. The maker of the car might say, so we made the car, but you bought it and you're using it, so you take responsibility.
Right.
So you get kind of a situation where the responsibility is sort of passed around like a hot potato. And so we have this new kinds of problems that we didn't seem to have before, with things like responsibility, questions about how we should treat robots. And it's interesting how, these are all very human questions that are raised in the context of robots and robotics. And so that's what I wanted to kind of discuss in this book. And I discuss, on the one hand, robots that, like self-driving cars. They don't look like humans. They don't act like humans. And you have, vacuum cleaning robots, lawnmower robots, military robots. They don't look like humans at all. But on the other hand, you do also have robots that, Sophia was one example, but there are others too, that are both made to look like humans and that people respond to some extent as if they are humans.
Yeah.
And that's really fascinating. And that raises questions such as, will there ever be a time where we should treat these robots with some degree of moral consideration, or is that always going to be ruled out as a bad idea?
I had a conversation with a gentleman named David Gunkel, who you may be familiar with, and
yes,
I think that we're kind of in the same groups on Twitter, and I like to follow all of you guys. But he's very interesting, and he wrote a book called Robot Rights that sort of brings up some of these ideas. Is your book in any way related to some of the things that David speaks about?
Oh, absolutely. So he's a friend of mine and a colleague, and I very much respect his work. I guess I would maybe disagree partly with it, although I do agree with him that we should take seriously the issue of when and if and so why robots should ever have rights. I guess some of his work seems to treat this actual whether the robot itself or him or herself, however you want to put it, has a kind of moral status and deserves to be treated with more consideration. At least the first three kind of parts of his book discusses that question. Mm-hmm. But I think at this stage it seems better to ask, could we ever treat other human beings sort of wrongly by mistreating robots that maybe look like them? An example I often like to use when I talk about this is that suppose, I make a robot that looks like you, mm-hmm. but I'm treating that robot, kicking it or whatever. Mm-hmm. It would seem that you would feel attacked. And so any robot that you make that sort of looks like a human being, you're going to be able to find people that kind of look a little bit like that robot and that would possibly feel that they're being attacked if we don't treat it well. So that kind of reason, in order to respect other human beings, maybe we should treat robots that look like human beings, in a disrespectful sort of way. But the idea that the robot itself would be sort of deserving of some sort of moral status and rights, then we start moving much more into sort of science fiction. And, of course, in science fiction, we do take seriously this idea. Let's say that the human characters in Star Wars would mistreat, let's say, C-3PO or R2-D2.
Right.
I think in the context of the fiction, we probably would think that that's wrong. Mm-hmm. But that's also, I think, because we attribute, personalities to those robots. We think that they can communicate with humans in the fiction in a human-like way. But the robots that we have in reality, in a way, we do attribute some kind of personality to them, and there are interesting cases. For example, some military robots that have been given military funerals when they have been destroyed because the soldiers have become so attached to them. You have other soldiers wanting to give medals of honor to certain military robot and making claims such as, this robot had a personality of his own. Are those the kinds of things that we would also accept upon reflection? Or is it rather the case that we maybe are of two minds about this? So our reflective mind, our reason might tell us that, it's just a machine. It's not really something with a personality, but then maybe it might be attached to the robot. We might respond to it as if it is a person of a sort. So this happens to be another topic that I spend quite a bit of in my book. This tendency that we have as human beings to want to read the minds of others. And so if I'm talking with a human being, I'm always kind of thinking that they must be thinking and feeling certain things, and I'm kind of predicting where the conversation is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And, if they smile, I think they're happy. If they, frown, I think they're not, etc. And that's a kind of hardwired impulse that we have to try to read the minds of others. So if you may put like a human face on it and you make the robot smile, instinctively you're going to think that the robot is happy. Even if the rational part of your mind tells you that, just a robot that's designed to look like it's happy. And I think this is another place where maybe David is going to he also kind of homes in on that aspect of human-robot interaction. And I think he thinks, if we start treating robots as if they have moral status and they should have rights, then, maybe, why don't we embrace it? Why not endorse it? Let's think that we maybe should take this idea seriously. And where I am more interested in asking the question, what does it do to our relation to other human beings? And how we, whether or not we're respecting them. That would be kind of a difference between the way we're approaching these things, although we're interested in exactly the same topics.
Okay. What would you say about the relationship of Hollywood and the media portrayal of robotics and AI, for example? I think you mentioned earlier that AI, and I would add robotics as well, are nowhere nearly as far along as many people might assume that they are because of the way that they're portrayed in the media and in film. If you actually go into the laboratory, oftentimes you'll laugh at how clumsy and silly the robots are and how many mistakes the technology actually still has in it. Maybe you could talk a little bit about media portrayal and then the way people intuit things.
Yeah, so in Hollywood movies, you see robots that are able to perform well across wide ranges of circumstances. So, in one scene, maybe C-3PO is having a conversation, and the next, he's I don't know if he's ever driving one of the spaceships, but could easily imagine that sort of thing.
Sure.
And the next, they're fighting a battle. But real-world robots tend to be really good at specific tasks in controlled environments, and really bad at anything else.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people have seen these very impressive videos of robots doing backflips, running up the stairs, walking in the woods, etc. But you can bet that most of those robots, that's the only thing they can do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have the backflipping robot and you ask it to do anything else, it's not going to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, is maybe the biggest difference between the robots that we see in films and in science fiction and real robots. They sometimes outperform human beings at particular tasks, but human beings so far, and presumably for a long time, are going to outperform the robots in terms of flexibility, ability to do different things in different situations, to improvise. So even though, like the backflipping robot, or there's another video of a robot dog that can run on a treadmill, that can run up the stairs, and actually some of the engineers are kicking the robot dog in the video, and it stabilizes itself. So that looks very impressive. That's probably the only thing that particular robot can do.
Mm-hmm.
And this also means that if you want a robot to function well, let's say in a logistics warehouse or a self-driving car on the road, you have to redesign or design the environment so that it becomes robot-friendly. There was a recent story in the news about some hackers showing that if you take a road sign saying that the speed limit is 35, and then sort of the three, you kind of draw a line so that it looks like the middle part of the three is like a little funny mid-shaped.
Yeah.
Humans would still see that as saying 3 at 35, but a Tesla car that was sort of tested against this thought it was an 8 all of a sudden. And so the Tesla Model S has the autopilot feature, and so they were able to make the Tesla accelerate up until 85 by just drawing that line that no human would think meet, but artificial intelligence in the car saw as an 8. So AI and robots, it can be really good and really smart at specific tasks, but really dumb and really incompetent. The situation a little bit. And this can also lead to situations where, if you want a well-working, let's again go back to the case of the logistics robots in warehouses, that can be also quite impressive. Then you have to design the interior of that warehouse so that it's robot-friendly, but of course that might not make it very nice for the humans who work there.
Yeah.
And so I guess the more we put robots into different roles and different, performing different tasks in society, we do face this kind of, if we want to make that work well, we're going to have to redesign the environment so that it's robot-friendly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be human-friendly and nice for us. So sometimes we're going to have this kind of trade-off. So maybe the robots will provide some benefit, but then we have to compromise and adjust ourselves to the robots in order to get those. And so this is sort of another running theme in the book that I am just publishing. We have this choice that for a lot of robots, if we want to get anything out of them, then we might need to adjust ourselves to them. That is not always going to be something that's very attractive to us. Again, if you take the traffic system that we have, so a self-driving car could perform very well on the highway, but if you go to the middle of Amsterdam, to take a Dutch example where I'm located in the Netherlands, there are lots of bikes everywhere, old European types of narrow streets, very difficult to navigate for a self-driving car. So if you want self-driving cars in Amsterdam, you would have to kind of rebuild the city, but of course no humans would like that. So that's a bit of a trade-off situation that we're going to be facing more and more as we learn more robots and AI.
All right, that's a good place for us to take a little break. My guest tonight, Dr. Sven Nyholm. He is a professor at Utrecht University. That is in the Netherlands. And, back with Dr. Nyholm in just a few minutes. Let's hear one from our featured musicians of the evening. In the meantime, this is one from Yin Yin. I will mention Dr. Nyholm, the best way to get in touch with him, or if you want to follow his work, you can do that on the web. Just go to Twitter. And he is at Sven, SVEN NYHOLM. That's Sven Nyholm, SVEN NYHOLM. Very easy to find on Twitter. That's the best way to communicate with the good doctor. All right, once again, it's Mike. You're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. One from Yin Yin. Then we'll get back to my conversation with Dr. Sven Nyholm. right, there's another one from our featured musicians of the evening. They're called Yin Yin. Like it. Good stuff from the Netherlands. We got more good stuff from the Netherlands with our guest this evening. His name is Dr. Sven Nyholm. You can find him on the web at Twitter at Sven Nyholm. And, of course, you can connect with him through my website as well. Right there on the front page, there's a big picture of his recently released book called Humans and Robots. And you can also directly connect up with his Twitter feed from there as well, okay? All right, it's Mike. You're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. My guest is Dr. Sven Nyholm. We'll get back to my conversation with Dr. Nyholm right now. Yeah, I think, up until very recently, as you mentioned, robots have primarily been relegated to controlled, designed environments. And now we're approaching a time where we have robots navigating freely in the world and interacting with humans and animals and things like that. This seems to me to be a sort of a line that's being crossed there.
Yeah, and most robots that are useful so far yet do that. I mean, they're not out in the wild, so to speak. But the self-driving car, that's something that's being at least experimented with in traffic out in the world, so to speak. And you have, there's some experimentation on, at least on university campuses with, for example, delivery robots. The robot might deliver a pizza or mail or packages or whatever. You have maybe the idea of delivery drones, so flying in the air, delivering things.
Yeah.
And so anytime you sort of let the robot out of the laboratory or out of the controlled environment, you face all kinds of challenges. And tonight, technical university with lots of engineers, and not all of them, but a lot of them, they think about small technical problems and with small solutions, and how can you make the room to the other, let's say, because that has a lot of people in it. You also have to start thinking about the social, that people behave in unexpected, unpredictable ways. They don't follow rules, and they maybe don't want the things that you designed the robots to do. And that all can create new kinds of challenges that maybe if I was an engineer designing a robot to solve a particular task, I didn't take into account. I mean, to again talk about the self-driving cars case, human beings, we tend to break traffic rules. We speed, we drive aggressively, we accelerate, sometimes not very gently, or brake not very gently. But the self-driving car, at least for now, is an attempt to create a more sort of optimized type of driving. So you would have a robot that always follows the speed limit, that accelerates gently, brakes gently, drives at a safe distance from other cars, etc. And if you take that kind of driving and you put it together with human driving, you have a kind of compatibility problem. And a lot of the minor accidents that have, including also the major accidents, but a lot of the accidents that have happened with self-driving cars are due to a kind of mismatch between the driving styles of humans and the driving styles of self-driving cars. And so you get these kind of questions. So again, should we adjust the self-driving cars to humans by making them, speed, disobey various traffic rules, making them drive aggressively? And you do have people that argue that, yes, this is a good idea. But then again, then you would counteract this goal of creating a safer, more environmentally friendly, more optimized kind of driving. And if you want a self-driving car that drives like a human, in a way, you can just have a human do the driving. You don't have a robot AI system to do it. So the other option then would be to try to adjust human driving to self-driving cars. And there are ways in which you can do it. I mean, you could put in speed limiting technology into cars so that it's impossible to speed. I mean, some trucks have this. Mm-hmm. You could put in alcohol locks so that at the very least everyone is always sober when they're driving. Yeah. You could, punish people more severely, even more severely if they cause an accident, and in those ways make people more like robots in their driving. But we're going to have to do something in order to kind of adjust human driving and self-driving car, robotic driving to each other, at least during the long period that a lot of experts foreseeable there would be both kinds of cars on the road. It's like even if we eventually transition to only having robotic self-driving cars, there's still going to be a very long period where people are still, they can't afford to buy a new car. They want to use the family car.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they buy a car with some degree of automation, but not full automation. And so you have generations of cars on the road with more or less automation, with maybe incompatible types of gear and programming in them. And it might be a little bit chaotic. And, even if you then maybe, you only have self-driving cars, that's going to be a long period of mixed traffic before we get to that point.
You've talked a little bit about the ethics of accidents and the algorithms that are used in self-driving cars that have to make a decision at some point. Perhaps you could talk about the trolley problem and how that might apply to self-driving cars.
Yeah, so, the trolley problem is a philosophical thought experiment that was, created in 1967, if I remember correctly, by a philosopher called Philippa Foot. And so she imagined a scenario where there's a train going down the train tracks, and then there's a guy standing next to a switch, and he can see that if he doesn't do anything, the train is going to hit 5 people who are on the track. But he can pull the switch and send the train off. But sadly, there's one person there. And so in order to save the 5, you'd have to redirect the trolley train onto the side track. And people are asked, would you do it? A lot of people say yes. And then in order to kind of tease out saving the many by sacrificing the few, philosophers have come up with lots of different variations on this theme.
Mm-hmm.
There's one variation where rather than redirecting the train onto a side track, you have to push someone in front of the train, a very heavy, large person, so that the heavy weight of this person would sort of set off the automatic brakes of the train. The 5 on the tracks would be saved that way, but now you have to physically push some of the train. So now a lot of people say you should do it, and then philosophers since then have kind of come up with various different versions of this case, and that's been treated up until recently as a kind of purely intellectual exercise, kind of tease out people's moral intuitions. But then, about 5 years ago, people started saying, now we actually have a kind of real-world trolley problem that we're facing, namely self-driving cars sometimes going to be driving into scenarios where it's obvious to them that they can't simply stop because they're driving too fast. Maybe there's something wrong with the brakes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go straight, let's say maybe there are 5 people on the road. If they go onto the sidewalk, maybe there's them there. So what should the self-driving car be programmed to do?
Yes.
Or, in another version of the case, you might have, let's say, 1 person on the street, 5 people in the self-car. If the car keeps going straight, it's going to hit that 1 person. It's off the road, it's going to go off a cliff or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can really very easily come up with sort of scenarios that, of course, a lot of them are very unrealistic, but some of them might possibly be more realistic. So the self-driving car might have a choice between crashing into another car or going off the road, thus risking things for the person in the car. So there's a question, should the car always prioritize the safety of whoever's in the car, or should it sometimes try to detect whether the situation calls, if there's a way of minimizing overall harm, which might mean that the people in the car will be sacrificed. So a lot of people have been saying, so now we actually have a kind of real-world trolley problem to deal with. And, in some of my research, and partly just because so many people had been saying that, I was asking myself, is it really like the trolley problem? And are the issues that were discussed in the trolley problem literature really the ones we should be focusing on? And at the very least, there are some interesting sort of disanalogies between these different cases. So the philosophical thought experiment, for example, we're typically asked to only focus on a very small set of aspects of the scenario. Just focus on the fact that there are 5 people on the tracks. The way to save the 5 is to redirect the train onto the side track. There's 1 person there. Set everything else aside and make a decision. We're asked, when we're doing this in a kind of philosophy classroom. But in a real world, a real life, we should take as many considerations as possible into consideration. And not just say, let's just focus on a small subset of possible relevant facts. So that's sort of one big key difference. Another is that I mean, I actually taught a class as early as a couple of days ago where I brought up the trolley problem because it has a nice sort of pedagogical value. And then it always happens that a student raises their hand and says, well, won't I go to jail if I kill, this other person, on to say the 5? And then in the philosophy classroom, you always say, well, let's set questions about legal and moral responsibility aside, and let's just think about, what you should do in this scenario. But, if you're thinking about the real-world ethics of self-driving cars, you can't set responsibility to think about it, because that's obviously whenever there's a car accident dead, it's always when people die, there's an investigation. There's always a question of whose fault it was, if anyone's fault. If it was anyone's fault, there's a question of should anyone be punished, held responsible for this. That's another thing that kind of clashes a little bit with the way that we use this idea in the philosophy classrooms. A third thing, in the trolley problem examples, you assume that you know all the facts with certainty. So you know that if I push the large person in front of the train, let's say, I know that it's a fine. Or if I redirect the train with the switch in the other example, I know again that I can say 5. I know I have to sacrifice 1. When it comes to self-driving cars and these hypothetical scenarios that they might be facing, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And so we have to make risk assessments and probability assessments. And we basically are planning for a scenario that may or may not. And so that's another kind of relevant difference, this important role of uncertainty and risk in real life as opposed to in a philosophical thought experiment. I mean, that's not to say that the trolley problem stuff of philosophy is wholly irrelevant. There are lots of interesting things that have come out of that discussion. But it is just to say that we should be a little bit more careful than some, both academics and journalists have been, before we say, oh, just like the trolley problem, because there are obviously many more complications and complexities in real life than in a philosophical thought experiment.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about human enhancement. This is becoming something that is bringing up a lot of questions as well. The idea that we can do things with technology to either enhance our own bodies, change them significantly. How does that play into the work that you do? Yeah,
that's something I've done a certain amount of work on as well. So one interesting thing about human enhancement is that, in real life, there are people who do what they call biohacking, that use their own bodies as kind of, experimental tools. They're trying to come up with ways of enhance themselves. But in terms of more research, things that could possibly be used as enhancements are typically discovered as a kind of side effects of other things. And so take something that I looked at quite a bit in my own research, namely what's called deep brain stimulation. So Parkinson's patients, for example, and other people with different kinds of problems, neurological problems, have sometimes electrodes implanted into their brain.
Okay.
There's a sort of a current that stimulates certain brain loops. This can be amazing. So a person with Parkinson's can regain control over their tremors and kind of walk fluently and talk fluently, etc., when electric current is turned on and the brain stimulation is working properly. In some people, though, this has interesting side effects. And those side effects range from very positive, sometimes comical, to scary and the opposite of comical. So there was one patient who found that their memory had been improved with the deep brain stimulation. Another patient, the Dutch patient, felt much happier with the brain stimulation turned on. They were not being treated for depression. They were being treated for something else. And actually, in that particular case, the thing that they were trying to treat with the deep brain stimulation, it wasn't helping, but the person felt much happier. And so she said to her doctor, leave it on because I feel so much happier now. But the doctor in that case said, no, I'm going to turn this off because it didn't help for what we were trying to treat. It just made you happier. And now I, as a doctor, am not in the business of making you happier. So that was an interesting case where you saw kind of a certain kind of enhancement as a side effect, but the treatment that was aimed at did not happen. Another example, and I have a friend, Brian Earp and Julie Savulescu, they just published a book about what they call love enhancement.
Yeah.
So a lot of drugs that are used for other things. I mean, for example, antidepressant drugs and drugs such as the ones that are used maybe to treat post-traumatic stress disorder, they also affect how we feel about the people around us, and also they can make us more trusting. They can open us up to things that we wouldn't otherwise be willing to do, to talk about certain topics, let's say, that we wouldn't otherwise be willing to talk about. They can change our emotions, and this could actually be used, Earp and Savulescu argue, to maybe improve human relationships. So maybe there could be a kind of love enhancement, and that's the case where any development that we've seen has been a kind of a side effect or discovered by accident when people have kind of been trying to come up with treatments for other things. So I've been quite interested in that topic too. And the question of, let's say that we actually able to develop very precise ways of tuning our emotions, a little bit as if we, on a stereo, have different dials, you can change the treble and the bass, etc., so that you could change the settings in your emotional life to fit your ideas of what you want. It's interesting. I mean, that, again, goes in a little bit in the direction of science fiction, but we can certainly influence how people feel in a more, in a less precise way. You can start wondering then, if I find that my romantic partner, I didn't know beforehand that they were using these love enhancement drugs, but I learned one day that indeed they are. Before they started using them, they couldn't really make themselves feel attached to me. I think a lot of people would find that to be sort of bad news. What they want is something what they can think of as authentic. Of course, this raises the question of what exactly is meant by authentic love. And maybe in some cases, inauthentic love would be better than no love, broken marriage, etc. But we can also ask this question of, okay, so is this all that we're wanting out of, let's say, love or happiness? Do we want it to be caused by, let's say, brain stimulation technology or some love drug or a hormone treatment? Or do we also care about the causes? Do we want it to be the case that our partners love us because we are the way we are who we are? Do we want happiness to depend on having achieved something that we think makes us worthy of happiness? So I think that's one very interesting thing that comes up when we start thinking about technological ways of changing how we feel, how we act. We do have a lot of ideas about what we deserve or what our behavior makes us worthy of. And we care about why other people think what they think about us. Is it because they have true beliefs about us, because they know us, or is it because we were able to fool them, or because they are under the influence of some drug? I think that raises sort of deep questions about what we truly care about and value in our own lives, but also in our relationships with the people around us.
You've addressed the idea of sexual robots and even love, perhaps, between humans and robots. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So there's an interesting development in the world of robotics, namely the attempt to build what are sometimes called sex robots. And one very interesting development is that there are at least 3 companies that have been sort of in the news, and that whenever there's a new story about sex robots, you hear about them. One company has made a robot that they call Roxy, spelled with 3 X's. Another has made a robot that they call Harmony, and a third has made a robot that they call Samantha. And even though these were developed as sex robots for sexual purposes primarily, there's been a kind of interesting development, but for all of them, the companies behind them are starting to suggest, well, maybe this could be more than something that's there for sex. Maybe it could also be something that could, a robot that could be a romantic partner, a friend. I mean, Roxy, the website on which you can read about that robot is called True Companion. You can read there that this robot supposedly can know your name, can get to know you, can get to like you and be a true friend. The robot harmony is also supposed to be, emotionally engaging with the user, so it's a kind of bond. And of course, these people looking at this robot, they're studying human psychology and what we know about what kinds of buttons you can push to make people feel attached to other human beings, and trying to create sort of the robotic equivalent of that. And so it raises the question of whether, on the one hand, if there's something unethical about creating a robot that would maybe lead people to think that the robot cares about them. This could be deceptive. It could be thought to take advantage of sort of vulnerable, lonely people. It could be thought to maybe make people, if you say, let's say someone gets very attached to such a robot and maybe they mostly interact with it, then they might not get any training in having human relationships of a kind of an intimate, romantic kind, and so they become sort of less able, perhaps, to have human romantic relationships. Those are some worries that you might have. On the other hand, you might also ask, okay, could there be a difference where the idea of human-robot love could make sense? And that, again, I think, raises the kind of questions that we mentioned just a moment ago when we talked about love enhancement. So what do we really want or value in love? And could you achieve those things with a robot? And you can ask, for example, commonly associated ideas that are associated with love. People talk about things such as being a good match, for example.
Yeah.
So it should be the case that, romantic partners, they, match for the other, and the other is also a good match for him or her. And so you can make a robot that's sort of custom-made to fit your taste and your likes and dislikes. But this ideal of having a good match would also seem to suggest that, you should be a good match for the robot. So that's one kind of challenge. Another idea would be that, when we value human relationships, we often think that there's a kind of commitment there. And that brings up the idea of sort of free choice, because even though you want your partner, your lover, to have certain feelings for you, you also want them maybe to commit to you, and you think that it's possible for them to do otherwise. So if you have something like a marriage ceremony and the person to be your lawfully wedded husband or wife or whatever, there seems to be an element of choice there. And if you really thought that the person you're marrying had some sort of compulsion and they couldn't do otherwise, and they will stick with you too, no matter what, and if they're slavishly devoted to you, that might start looking quite different than what you are looking for if you're looking for someone to commit to you. And so they would seem that the idea of a relationship involves the idea of choice. And so you might ask, could a sex robot that's supposed to love you, could it have a choice? Could it be that the sex robot might choose, say, no, I'm not ready to commit, or that it says, I could do otherwise, but I will commit. That sounds, again, like a crazy idea. But so you see that when you start thinking about these things that we value in the human case, it might start looking unrealistic to think that the robot could play that role of a romantic partner in the same way that a human could, because it really requires capacity for choice, the idea that you could be a better or worse match for someone else. And so I find that really fascinating. So that's certainly something I've been thinking about when I think about human robots and the human-robot interaction in the book as well.
All right, there we go. That's another good place to take a break here. You listen to Radio Orbit. It's KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. My name is Mike Hagan. My guest tonight is Dr. Sven Nyholm, Assistant Professor of Ethics at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. You can find him online at Sven Nyholm on Twitter. And if you just want to click over there to my site, there's a big image of his new book that's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. It's a wonderful book, and you can get a look at it on the front page of my website there, and if you click on it, it'll take you right over to Sven. All right, we're going to take a little break here, and I'll come back with the final 25 minutes or so of my interview with Dr. Sven Nyholm. In the meantime, we're going to hear one from our featured musicians of the evening. They're called Yin Yin, and this is called Sui Ya. All right, it's Mike, Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia. Back in a few minutes. All right, another one from Yin Yin. Digging the music tonight. Hope you're liking it as well. It's Mike. You're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. All right, it's just about 20 minutes after midnight now on the 2nd of June, 2020. You've joined me right in the middle of an interview that I recorded just a little bit ago with Dr. Sven Nyholm from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. We are talking about artificial intelligence and robotics and technology in general and some of the moral, ethical implications of such technology. Dr. Nyholm has a brand new book. It's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. You can find information about him on the web at Sven Nyholm on Twitter. And you can also link directly to him from my site at mikehagan.com. All right, we're on the web streaming tonight at www.kopn.org. Appreciate y'all joining me. And let's get back to our interview now with Dr. Sven Nyholm. Yeah, one of the things that I had on my list here to talk with you about was the thoughts and images in our minds about robots and what they tell us about ourselves and what it is to be human. You've talked about that a little bit. Maybe you could say a few words to that.
Yeah, so there is, for example, a Japanese robotics researcher, and I think, if I remember correctly, his name is Hiroshi Ishiguro, and he is creating robots that look like humans. One of them is a robotic copy of himself. He has also created a robot that looks like a human female called Erica, and when people ask him, why are you creating these human-like robots, one of the things he tends to say is that, we humans can understand ourselves better if we can create robots that look like us. The robot Sophia, which is made to look like human as well, they too say that we can understand human beings better if we create robots that are like humans. And so I think that we project ideas about ourselves onto these robots that we create, at least if those robots are meant to be like humans. Of course, it's a bomb disposal robot or a self-driving car or a lawnmower or a vacuum cleaner. Those are not going to look like humans. They're not going to act like humans. And so they're not going to be kind of a mirror for humans to look into. But I do think that there is a deep fascination that a lot of people share with the idea of creating a robot that's like a human. And a lot of people find it scary, and sometimes people talk about what they call the uncanny valley. This is the idea that if a robot is kind of like a human but not really, that's eerie, and that gives rise to a kind of a very strange feeling of discomfort. It's familiar, yet it's alien, it's strange at the same time. So some people do research about how can we create human-like robots that are clearly not human, but they're somewhat human-like, but that don't give rise to that eerie feeling that's associated with this idea of the uncanny valley. So you have mixed emotions, I think, about the idea of humanoid robots in most people, and it doesn't seem possible to kind of stop people from wanting and trying to create robots. And so in a way, I think we have to try to reckon with that development and think about, how should we react to this? Of course, you can ban some people say we should ban the creation of sex robots. There's a campaign against humanoid sex robots. It's called the Campaign Against Sex Robots. And they say, for example, that it should be forbidden to create robots that look like humans and are made for sexual purposes. But it's going to be very hard to manage to ban that, because if you have robots that are not created for sexual purposes, the idea of having sex with them seems to be something that comes up in people's minds. In a lot of movies and TV series and so on, where there are humanoid robots that are not made for sexual purposes, that's the sort of thing. It's the movie Ex Machina, for example,
Fantastic,
or the TV series, I think it's called Real Humans. In both of those, you have robots created for other purposes, but the human characters in them, they want to have sex with these robots.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be something you see. There's even a robot that doesn't look very much like a human. It's called Pepper. It looks a little bit like a mix between an alien or something like that. But the instruction manual says, don't try to have sex with this robot. So there is this attraction to, mixed feelings about, and fascination with, I think, the idea of humanoid robots, humans that look and act like humans. And so that's something that we're going to have to deal with as a society, I think.
Okay. All right, let's switch gears here a little bit. I've got a few more questions for you. We haven't talked much about military applications and about how this affects the way we look at ethics, for example, the ethics of war or the ethics of courage, these types of things. Could you talk a little bit about military applications of AI and robotics and how this plays out in the ethical field? I think that many of these technologies are actually utilized perhaps initially in the military sphere to begin with, before they filter down into the public sort of sphere. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something, again, where a lot of people are arguing for banning certain kinds of robots, what are sometimes called lethal autonomous weapons systems.
Yes.
Where the idea is that the robot or the AI technology would then select their targets and kill human beings. And that's something that, a lot of high-profile people, both academics and others, such as Elon Musk and Tesla and others like that, are arguing that these should be banned and forbidden, and that it's important to always retain what they call meaningful human control over any military technology.
Mm-hmm.
And when people talk about this, one of the things that they sometimes say is that in war, it can be justice for human beings to kill other human beings. What some philosophers call the moral equality of different combatants, so that in a war scenario, it's understood that you might get killed and that you might kill others, but there has to be a human that takes responsibility for this, and there has to be sort of a human on the other side. But if one side of the conflict starts introducing not or human people trying to kill other humans, but rather robots that take over that job, then that fundamentally changes the idea of a military conflict. Because what if someone is killed and they have been selected as a target by an autonomous system? Again, you get this problem of possible responsibility gap, where people might start saying, well, I wasn't responsible because the target was selected by a machine. I mean, the military setting, in a way, makes it a little bit easier to deal with these responsibility issues, just because it's such a structured part of human life. I mean, like, the military has a very clear sort of hierarchy where some people have what is called command responsibility over others. So if soldiers do things, then sometimes commanders are held responsible because they have the ultimate responsibility. And I think you can see how we could use some of that machinery from theories of command responsibility in the domain of military robotics. So if a human commander deploys a lethal autonomous weapon system and that system kills a human being, you could still have the commander, I think, be responsible because there's this command structure in the organization. I mean, you couldn't really imagine, I think, a military robot that's sort of operating on its own. It's always going to be part of a team. So even if you did have some sort of high degree of functional autonomy, meaning that it can operate on its own for certain periods of time, there are always going to be humans who decide to use those, who maybe decide to discontinue the use of robots, and who maybe try to update them and change their settings, etc., based on how they think that they perform in the field, so to speak. So I worry maybe a little bit less about responsibility issues than some others looking at the ethics do. I do think that there is an interesting question of whether it should ever be permitted to have a robot that's designed to kill human beings. And some people make a interesting comparison here with the case of the self-driving car, because the self-driving car will predictably sometimes kill human beings. But that's a side effect, not intended, but merely predicted. So, they have already killed humans. They have died inside of self-driving cars, and they've been hit by self-driving cars. But, of course, none of this was intentional. The intention is to create a safer type of car where fewer people will be killed, and there will be some accident scenarios. So that's quite different than creating a robot that's specifically designed to kill humans. And certainly in a lot of common sense ethical thinking, and also in some doctrines that are widely discussed in philosophy, theology, etc., there's a double effect. So where people say it's sometimes okay to injure others if it's a side effect that you didn't intend, because you were trying to pursue some good aim, you were trying to save someone's life, you were trying to save, you were trying to achieve something good, and then you couldn't, but accidentally killed someone you would, let's say that you're driving really fast to get to the hospital, and someone steps in front of your car and you accidentally kill someone. That's a side effect that could happen if you drive really fast with a car. But if you create a robot, or you have a human being whose main aim or main goal is to kill others, then you can't say that, it's merely a foreseen side effect. It's merely something that we knew might happen, but we didn't want to achieve.
Right.
Now you're designing a technology that mentally seek out targets and kill them. I mean, that's a lot of people who think about this topic. You should draw a line there. That's not something that you would want. So if humans are going to be killed by anyone, it's going to be by humans who can take responsibility and maybe who kill them in self-defense or something like that. But the more you have a machine that's making that decision, and the more it's designed for that purpose and that purpose only, the more controversial it becomes.
Okay. All right, just a couple more questions for you here. I'm in manufacturing.
Sure.
When I don't do radio, I do some quality control work for a manufacturer here. And I've seen a lot of changes in manufacturing over the last 25 years or so, to the point where automation and robotics are making a major impact. Could you talk a little bit about the future of work and how the ethics of technology sort of plays in the field of employment?
Yeah, so there are various different scenarios that one can think about to discuss. I mean, so one very extreme scenario that a friend of mine, John Danaher, is quite interested in is the scenario where automation and robotics take over most work tasks, and so you would have very little work left over for humans to do. So that would be what's sometimes called technological unemployment. But you also have what I maybe think are more realistic scenarios where people are still working, but they are working very closely with various kinds of machines and robotics, automated technologies. And that might mean, again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that you have to make the environment robot-friendly. And so it means that ultimately you get better outcomes in terms of faster delivery of packages, a better, products being manufactured. But you actually have a person who now performs a much less stimulated. They have less freedom to kind of design their own, how they do to follow the machine, because otherwise, you're not going to get those outcomes before. So you might get less freedom in how you work. You might have less contact with other human workers because you're mostly interacting with machine all day long. And so you start maybe chipping away at some of the things that we associate with meaningful work, such as creativity, the freedom to kind of craft your own job, how you do it, the contact with your coworkers. And so that, in a way, is a kind of very negative scenario how things might develop. In one of my papers that I've written with some co-authors, we looked at, those are threats to meaningful work that might come out of automation and robotics. Could there also be opportunities for meaningful work? And at least in theory, you can imagine things. For example, you might, in order to be able to work with some new robotics or new machinery, you might need to acquire new skills. You might need to take on more responsibility, because now you are not only responsible for what you do, you're also responsible maybe for what a robot is doing that you're working with. And again, you have to maybe learn some new skills. And so these are the kinds of things, learning new skills, taking on new responsibilities that are also sometimes associated with meaningful work. So there's a potential for some aspects of this to actually create opportunities for new kinds of meaningful work. We looked in our research, me and my colleagues, both at this from a sort of philosopher's armchair perspective, if you will. We thought about opportunities and threats to meaningful work. But we also had a psychology postdoc working with us who went out and looked at how things are in Dutch warehouses where they're using more and more robotics. And there, of course, it was easier to identify threats to meaningful work than it was to identify proof of opportunities for meaningful work. And where there was seen to be improvements, there seemed to be mostly on the level of management as opposed to the people who are sort of lower down in the work hierarchy. So I don't necessarily think that automation and robotics need to lead to less meaningful work, but we really have to make choices to have a sort of human focused perspective on this, and not just technology-driven developments where we're just asking, how can we be the most efficient in terms of producing outcomes, cheaper, faster, etc., and make the humans adapt to this. If we want people to also have access to meaningful work, we may need to also think in terms of, can we slow down? Is it really necessary that all packages, let's say, are delivered as quickly as they are these days? Can we? Do we really need all the products to be perfect? I mean, in some domains of life, people sort of actually value some certain degrees of variation and imperfection, and the human touch, the personal touch, as we sometimes call it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, so in a way, it's a kind of a clash between ideals. On the one hand, you have efficiency, speed, uniformity in outputs. On the other hand, you have things such as, interesting variations, maybe doing things more carefully, having the work that humans do that produces meaningful. And, of course, if you're looking at things from a kind of management perspective, just you're trying to make the organization be, not lose too much money and have everything be quick, then at first glance, it might seem like a good idea to just go for the technology-driven, technology-oriented perspective. But on the other hand, actually, if you look at organizations where workers have more, where employees have more freedom and more creativity, that also tends to lead to happier employees, people becoming more creative, becoming more, maybe, let's say, loyal to the organization, more willing to work for it, etc. So in the long term, it's not necessarily always going to be the case that what looks like the quick technology-driven solution is going to yield the best outcomes. But so I think we really have to make sort of choices and think about how we allow some of these developments to go. And we shouldn't view it as a kind of development that necessarily always in every domain leads to more automation, more robotics. In some domains, it might make things worse and not actually improve things, neither from a point of view of the services, the goods offered, nor from the point of view of sort of job satisfaction for the people working in these different organizations.
Yeah, okay. As a side note, I've spoken with John Danaher. I'm very impressed, and very thought-provoking stuff that he does.
Absolutely.
Let's kind of finish off with more of a philosophical thing. I would consider you a scholar when it comes to Immanuel Kant, and you have a very interesting paper on, I'm not sure if it's your website, but at any rate, Kant's universal law formula revisited is something that you wrote a couple years ago. And perhaps you could visit that a little bit with the listeners and explain why you think it's important. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, so, Kant has this idea that ethics should be about a good person is someone who has their principles, who tries to live in a kind of principled way and follow certain rules that they adopt for themselves. And then the idea that Kant had was, okay, well, that seems good. And then, how do I choose principles that I'm supposed to be following in order to be a kind of a good, virtuous person? Well, a good idea seems to be to choose principles that you would be willing to lay down as universal laws for all people, so that it's not only the case that you take these on board as the principles that you want to live by. You should also ask, how would these other people also make these principles into their principles? Would you be kind of happy with that scenario, that your principles are also shared by others? And this, on the face of it, in a way, it's kind of an updated version of the golden rule. The way that you treat other people should match with how you want them to treat you. What Kant adds the idea of the principles that you adopt for yourself should also be principles that you would be willing to lay down as rules for other people. Seems like a great idea, very intuitive, but philosophers having been kind of, it's almost an occupational hazard that we always feel an itch to come up with counterexamples. We always feel that we, in order to sort of engage critically with something, we have to think about strange cases where if you follow the suggested rules, things somehow they get bizarre, it can, counterintuitive, etc. And certainly this Kantian idea of principles that you lay down are willing to treat as universal laws. And that's a kind of key target of a lot of interesting counterexamples that people have tried to cook up. And some of that discussion has kind of not necessarily taken Kant's own explanations what he means by this idea as a starting point, but rather kind of a desire to find strange counterexamples in scenarios where this seems to be a bad idea. So people say things such as, well, if I adopted as a personal principle that, let's say, people of my own race, they should be treated better than people of other races. Well, if I'm a member of that particular race, then perhaps I could want this to be universal law because that would benefit people like me, but it would certainly be terrible for people of other races. So the question is, does the Kantian ideal of living according to principles that you would like to lay down as universal law, would it sanction this? Would it say that, yes, this is morally okay? And obviously that seems to be deeply immoral. So that's one example of this kind of counterexample that people comes up with. Other examples are things such as, well, if I just describe a very complicated rule, let's say I'm allowed to rob people who wear a certain kind of type of jeans, who walk in a certain street, and who wear a certain kind of baseball cap or whatever. You can devise the rule that's so rare that there's only basically one opportunity to act on it, namely the one that you're facing right now. And you can say, yeah, I want this to be a universal law because now I can rob this person. And so everyone could do it, but most people wouldn't have an opportunity to do it. But that's another kind of counterexample that people have discussed, like creating this really complicated rules that seem to apply only to you and that would give you kind of a license to do whatever you want.
Right.
And so I was interested in how this seems to be taking this idea very far away, maybe from what Kant himself intended and wanted to achieve by formulating that moral ideal, and kind of just twisting it around too much in a way. So I wanted to go back and look at sort of all of the key terms that Kant introduces when he talks about, when he talks about principles, he calls them maxims. That's a kind of old-fashioned word. And he talks about a sort of an ideal that he calls the kingdom of ends, where everyone relates to each other on the basis of shared principles in a way that he thinks would mean mutual respect, treating everyone in a dignified way. And if you start looking at all of these things that he describes as what he's looking for, then something like, racist principles, they just don't fit in anymore because we wouldn't have a community of people on shared principles. Everyone's treating everyone in a kind of dignified way. You wouldn't have a scenario where people would make these exceptions for themselves so that they formulate complicated rules so that they can say, well, I'm following the rule I was willing to lay down for everyone, but it's been tailor-made for your interests. That seems to clash with the more general ideals that Kant put forward in his general theory about. He also has another famous rule, which is he says that we should always treat the humanity in each person always as an end in itself and never as a mere means. And he claims that this idea of acting on principles that you'd be willing to lay down as universal laws, in a way, it's the other side of the coin from that other idea of treating people as ends and never as mere means. And so it seems to me that when you try to interpret what Kant talks about these different principles, you want to interpret those ideas in relation to each other so that you can spell out an ideal that would really fit with this idea of not instrumentalizing others, treating them with dignity, respect, etc. And a lot of the counterexamples that have been formulated against that first principle that we talked about, they don't seem to take into account that that's what he was trying to achieve. So I've been quite interested in trying to reconstruct what exactly it was. And on the one hand, I think he ends up with a very attractive idea, but it's more like an ideal, a practical rule that you could follow in every scenario. So like if you're thinking about how to, let's say, program a self-driving car, to get back to the previous discussed example, what it should do in an accident scenario, it's not so clear to me that you could actually use the idea of following a principle that you want to be universal law as a direct decision-making procedure to just kind of decide exactly what the right answer is. It's more like an ideal, okay, you want whatever rules you choose to be ones that that would treat everyone equally, that would respect people's dignity, etc., not treat them as mere means. And what exactly that means in practice, for that you might need to move to some other kind of principle than this more general ideal that someone like Kant describes as general moral philosophy.
Okay. Wow, I tell you, interesting times we are living in, Dr. Sven. Let's wrap it up, and we'll mention your book once again. You have a new book that's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. If people are interested in your book or other stuff related to your work, how's the best, or what's the best way for them to find information about you? Do you have contact information or Twitter, or what would you like, sir?
I guess actually Twitter would be the best, easiest way to find out what I'm doing, because whenever I do something new, such as, for example, appearing on your show, or I have a book out, or paper out, or a video I'm participating in, or something like that, I always put up a link on Twitter, and I think I'm the only Sven Nyholm on there. So, and it's certainly, if you look for, I think my Twitter handle is at Sven Nyholm, my name.
Yeah.
And so that's a good place to go. I mean, the book, you can already order it from Amazon if you're so inclined. So Twitter would be the place I would recommend.
Okay, very good. Well, I sure appreciate your time. You're doing really interesting and important work. I hope we can stay in touch, and as this stuff moves forward, maybe we can do an update now and again down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me on your show.
You bet. You take care of yourself, Dr. Sven Nyholm. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, Dr. Sven Nyholm. He's an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Utrecht University. That is in the Netherlands. And he's got a wonderful new book, Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. You can find him on the web at Sven Nyholm on Twitter, and you can link there directly from my site from here on out. All right, great stuff. I appreciate Dr. Sven spending some time with me, and you all as well. Hope you enjoyed that. And let's take a little break here, play a little piece of music. You can all grab a glass of water or a beer or something, or whatever you do, and we'll come back and we'll do a little space weather and maybe open the phone, see if anybody wants to talk about anything. It's a little before 1 o'clock in the morning now on the 2nd of June, and you're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia. All right, it's Mike Hagan, and I'll be back with you in just a few minutes. right, there you go. There's another one from our featured musicians of the evening. They're called Yin Yin. You're listening to it here on Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM, streaming on the web at kopn.org. My name is Mike Hagan. Good to be with you all tonight. Just had a fascinating interview brought to you tonight. Dr. Sven Nyholm. He's a professor there at a university up in the Netherlands, Utrecht University, as a matter of fact. And very interesting conversation with Dr. Nyholm. If you missed it, check it out on the web next week sometime, okay? All right, before we get too much further, let's say that this program is supported in part by Pizza Tree Pizza. Pizza Tree offers pizza by the slice, specialty pies, and delivery. Pizza Tree is located at 909 Cherry Street and is open 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. Actually, they're not open on Monday. But anyway, more info is available at pizzatree.com or on Facebook. All right. I also want to mention that we are having a one-day pledge drive tomorrow. Not Tuesday. It's already Tuesday. On Wednesday, June 3rd. And I'd like to encourage everyone to try to help the station out, donate whatever you can, as much as you can. It's a very difficult time for lots of small businesses, and it's a difficult time for KOPN as well. It's a difficult time for everybody right now, obviously. And economically, it's a challenge unless you're just a super wealthy person, I guess. But anyway, there aren't many of them around here at KOPN, and we could really use a helping hand. On June the 3rd, we'll be doing some special broadcasting all day. You'll hear some familiar voices, and they'll all be kind of echoing the same message. Do what you can to help your community radio station at a time when they really need it. So June the 3rd, please tune in to KOPN anytime during the day, all day, and consider a donation to help the station stay the station. Okay. What do we got? 5 minutes before midnight. No, not midnight. 5 minutes before 1 in the morning. All right, but we'll do space weather at the top of the hour here. I will say that there are lots of things to talk about in the news. Last week it was all COVID. This week, very little COVID on Monday. If you go scrolling through the news this morning, doesn't mean it's still not news. It's just not as prominent as it was a week ago for reasons that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and we can talk about that on the telephone and on the radio if you so choose. So we'll do space weather here in a few minutes, but I'm going to open the phone lines as well. 573-443-7380, 573-443-8255. Both those numbers are available if you'd like to call and participate in the program here. Anything you'd like to talk about, including current events and your position or observations, experiences, whatever. Very interested in hearing what you got to say out there, and I'm fascinated by the whole thing and appalled at the same time, and so many different emotions, and it's just a really, really unbelievable time right now. So anyway, please feel free to call and share your opinion or your perspectives, all that stuff with me, okay? 573-443-7380, 573-443-8255. I'd love to hear what's on your mind, okay? All right, what else? Let's mention Dr. Sven Nyholm one more time on the web at Sven Nyholm. That's on Twitter. And if you go to mikehagan.com, you can click on the picture of his book that's right there on the front page, and that'll take you over to his Twitter feed as well. And if you're interested in getting the book, there's lots of links at that point to connect you up with it, okay? All right, yeah, interesting stuff from Dr. Nyholm, and the sort of whole field of ethics in regard to technology is really one that has sparked my interest, and I'm doing my best to speak with a lot of the folks that are doing work in that field and those ideas. Okay, space weather. Let's start with the sun, like we always do. The sun is still blank with no sunspots. We're going on 30 days now, actually 31 days if we can make it through today. 31 days straight, that would be without any sunspots on the disk. There is, though, evidence that there might be something coming into view pretty soon there. There was a pretty good-sized B-class flare that happened earlier on Monday, just a little while ago, but earlier in the day on Monday. Now, a B-class flare is nothing to get too excited about. They go up in along the alphabet as they go up in intensity. So we have oftentimes M-class flares is the next sort of significant rating, and even M-class flares are nothing really uncommon. Certainly during solar minimum they might be, and that's where we're at right now. But a B-class flare is nothing to get excited about. We've seen X-class flares in the past. We've seen flares that have literally blown the dials off of the instruments that record this stuff. In fact, they had to create a whole nother sort of level back in 2007, I think it was. At any rate, there is evidence that there might be a new active region on the sun which will be rotating around and turn toward Earth later this week. And if that's the case, maybe we'll see a sunspot or two on the solar disk. Don't count on it, though. It might, it's possible for flares to erupt without the existence of a sunspot. So anyway, that's happening on the sun. Not much else. A new discovery that, well, I guess it was first discovered about a year ago, but been confirmed now over the last months. If you look at the tops of thunderstorms, you can often see interesting phenomenon. We've talked on the program before about what they call sprites and pixies, and they even have, it's weird, they use these sort of creatures of the wood sort of terms for these things: sprites, trolls, elves, pixies, that type of thing. But those are all descriptions of exotic phenomena that have surprised people who investigate this type of stuff since the mid-1980s. And there's a new one that came into the astronomical sphere about a year ago, and they call them green ghosts. So now there's a guy, his name is Thomas Ashcraft, who was observant enough and patient enough to get some remarkable video and still photographs of something that happened over New Mexico on May the 25th. And if you go to spaceweather.com or to my site at the Radio Orbit forum, you can actually watch the video of what Mr. Ashcraft filmed. But at any rate, there was a very cool sort of jellyfish sprite that he got on film. And then he also noticed that above, on the top parts of the sprites, that there were sort of green, sort of haze hue over the top. Now, this was originally discovered about a year ago by a Houston based, and that's Texas, Houston-based storm chaser whose name is Hank Shima. And he is also known online as the Pecos Hank, or as Pecos Hank, I guess. And anyway, this was back in May of 2019 that Hank Shima said that he had recorded some sprites over a storm in Oklahoma, and when he reviewed the footage, he noticed a mysterious green afterglow above some of the larger sprites. And this is the same thing that Thomas Ashcraft was able to get some film of just a couple of nights ago. Now, originally, Mr. Shima was facing a lot of skepticism because they put some of their images up on social media, and no one had ever heard of that before, and people were arguing that it was a camera after effect, some sort of lens flare or a sensor problem or whatever. But over the following months, Paul Smith, who was a guy who was actually working really closely with Hank Shima, they got a bunch of high-resolution images of these so-called ghosts that pretty much silenced the skeptics. And for now, no one really knows exactly what causes these things. Their color might be a clue. If you have seen Aurora Borealis, oftentimes those images are green, and oftentimes that color comes from oxygen. So that may be the same for green ghosts. We're not really sure yet. But yeah, never know. The hypothesis inspired the name GHOST, and that is an acronym for Green Emissions for Excited Oxygen in Sprite Tops. Boy, they really stretch it, don't they? Anyway, Hank Scheima tells us, more importantly, they were named ghosts to maintain the theme of other transient luminous events such as sprites, elves, trolls, and pixies. All right, interesting stuff. What else we got here? The All Sky Fireball Network. We've had 4 sporadic fireballs over the course of the last 24 hours or so. As I mentioned often enough, NASA and many other space agencies operate cameras and software that is constantly scanning the skies out and beyond the Earth and outside of our atmosphere, and of course inside our atmosphere as well. And they're looking for things that might be heading our way. And there's a category of those objects that are called potentially hazardous asteroids. There's a larger group that are called near-Earth asteroids. The potentially hazardous asteroids are larger objects that are among these near-Earth objects, and also ones that can come really close to our planet and intersect with our orbit. I'm looking at the list right now. Hey, they changed it. They must have heard me last week. Remember I told you there were only 2,018 potentially hazardous asteroids? Well, it had been like that for quite some time. They had not updated that list for quite a while. Now, as of June 2nd, 2020, there were 2,037. So they added 19 potentially hazardous asteroids over the course of the last few months since I last updated you. So we'll have to make a marker of that. They changed that on June the 2nd, and we'll see when they change it again, all right? Anyway, so they're constantly identifying these types of things, and they'll find them, either in an official capacity, like one of these NASA cameras, but also they can be identified by by independent and amateur astronomers. That happens often enough with discovery of lots of different objects, including comets and gamma ray bursts and supernova and things like that. So anyway, on the list of upcoming Earth asteroid encounters, there are quite a few that come reasonably close here in June. We've got a real close brush with one this afternoon, as a matter of fact. An asteroid designated 2020 KK7, which is about 20 meters across at its longest point. And that's going to come about 1.3 lunar distances away from the planet. So, it's not quite 300,000 miles, but again, in cosmic terms, that's just a brush. So it's going to come pretty close. Last week, we had 2 asteroids that actually came inside of the orbit of the moon. One was actually quite close, 0.4 lunar distances from the planet. And then we had another one that was 0.6 lunar distances, and that's inside the orbit of the moon, right? So 0.4 lunar distances would be a little bit less than half. The moon's at about 240,000 miles, so you're talking 120,000 miles away. That's almost considered atmosphere. Luckily, these are small asteroids and nothing really to be too concerned about, even if they did enter the atmosphere. But just to show you, that stuff happens. They do come pretty close, and in this case, they were just very small stones. So a few large ones have hit the planet back over the course of history, and the results are always stunning and staggering if you're around at the time. If you're a species that's living at the time, it's going to be very tough going for a while. But it's also a punctuation point where new species then begin to have their shot, because the environment changes so greatly that only the strong and the smart can make it. And a lot of times an environmental change will eliminate a whole bunch of individuals of particular species, and sometimes the entire species. So anyway, it's happened in the past. Hopefully that we've had enough stuff going on, right? We don't need an asteroid impact. We've got COVID-19, and now we've got just a major unrest and social discord all around the country, and it's a real difficult situation. So let's not have any big stones coming our way at the same time, okay? All right, let's talk a little bit more about what's going to be happening this week. Tonight, actually, we are in Missouri, which is Central Daylight Time right now, and that means tonight at about 10:38 to be exact, the moon will reach perigee. And at perigee, that means that the moon is as close to our planet as it ever gets. And at perigee, the moon is about 226,406 miles from the Earth. It'll be in Virgo tonight, and there are a couple of sort of conspicuous stars that you can use the moon to identify. Spica is up there. Spica is a very bright star that is in the constellation Virgo. And then you have Arcturus, which is about 33 degrees or so above Spica in the sky, and it's one of the nightest brights in the star. It's one of the night's brightest stars. Arcturus is in the constellation Boots, so some good star watching tomorrow night. Wednesday, Venus is in inferior conjunction about 1 o'clock in the afternoon Missouri time on Wednesday. What this means is that Venus and Earth are both on the same side of the sun. So if you can imagine the Earth, and then if you're above the disk of the plane of the ecliptic, you could look down and you could see the sun in the middle, and then you'd see you wouldn't see Mercury right now, but you would see Venus essentially lined up with the Earth, both on the same side of the sun. They call that inferior conjunction. That can only happen with objects that are inside the orbit of the Earth. So with regard to planets, it can only involve the planet Venus or the planet Mercury. Both of those can have an inferior conjunction. Outside of the planet of the Earth, I forget the term for it. I don't think it's exterior conjunction, but it's something similar to that when you have a lineup with planets that are outside the orbit of the Earth. But at any rate, there's going to be an inferior conjunction of Venus and Earth tomorrow afternoon at about 1 o'clock on Wednesday. All right. Wednesday will also mark the 50th anniversary of the first spacewalk that American astronauts ever did. It was completed by a man whose name was Ed White, and it happened during the Gemini 4 mission. Now, on Wednesday night, you can see the same constellation, or at least the one that's named after, or the mission was named after it, Gemini, the twins. That'll be in the west-northwest, and there are a couple of real bright stars associated with Gemini. That's Castor and Pollux. And they'll be essentially side by side above the horizon, maybe 20 degrees above the ecliptic, and maybe an hour or so after sunset. All right, on Thursday, Mercury will be at its greatest eastern elongation. Good to be viewing Mercury on Thursday, June 4th. The planet won't set until about 2 hours after sunset. It's not going to be very high in the sky, but about an hour after the sun sets, just above the horizon, you'll see the 0.4 magnitude planet of Mercury, and it'll be below Castor and Pollux that I just mentioned, that you can find real easily on the night before. But anyway, it'll be sinking in the west-northwest as it gets a little bit darker, and you'll have to again take a look for Mercury, about 15 degrees below Castor and Pollux, and that'll be just a little bit after twilight. All right. Okay. Anything going on Friday? Well, I guess you got full moon on Friday. It actually happens on Friday afternoon, about 2:12 in the afternoon here in Missouri, 3:12 Eastern Time. There's also going to be what's called a penumbral lunar eclipse that will happen on Friday. It really isn't visible to observers in the United States or Canada, or really even much of South America. The eastern portion, perhaps, of South America, as well as Africa, Australia, Europe, and most of Russia, will be able to view all or part of the event. A penumbral eclipse is an eclipse that occurs when the moon passes through, well, there's a lighter part of the Earth's shadow. It's sort of like the edge of the Earth's shadow, if you can sort of imagine that, but they call it the penumbra. And it'll cause a shading effect on the moon, but the moon won't go completely dark. So that's why they call it a penumbral eclipse, because it's just sort of on the edge of the shadow, and or the shadow doesn't darken the moon completely. So anyway, that's what's happening this week in the skies above our heads. Hope you enjoyed that. Let's take a break here and play a piece of music. We'll come back, open the phone lines again. We'll go through the news and see if we can get any of you to call and give me a load of whatever's on your mind. It's Mike, and you're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia 89.5 FM. We're streaming on the web at kopn.org. And for me, you can find information on the web at www.mikehagan.com. All right, for music tonight, we've been listening to a band that's called Yin Yin. I want to send a shout out to my friend Seth, who is always right there when you need him to come up with new music. And he certainly did not disappoint in this recent suggestion. Great advice from my buddy Seth. Music from Yin Yin tonight. They're based out of the Netherlands, and great stuff. We're going to hear another one from them right now. This one is called Alpaca Mountain. I'll tell you a little bit about the band before we do that, though. They're actually, I mentioned that they're from the Netherlands, which was exactly what I was looking for, because Dr. Sven Nyholm, of course, was speaking to us from the Netherlands. But anyway, they kind of mix it up a little bit. They got some psychedelic influences, obviously. They got some real danceable stuff. I heard some Asian influences in there for sure. And, man, a little disco, some funk, electronica, I don't know, a whole bunch of different stuff mixed in there. Makes it some really cool music. And again, I'm glad that we got a chance to share it with you tonight. Let's hear again one from Yin Yin. This is called Alpaca Mountain. You're listening to it here. It's Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia. Cool stuff. Yeah, once again, great stuff there from our featured musicians of the evening. They're called Yin Yin. You listen to it here. It's KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. My name is Mike Hagan, and this is Radio Orbit. All right, let's see what's happening in the news. Let me go to Twitter here and say hi. Okay, hi, everybody. There are 35 people online at the forum. I appreciate that. Hi to everybody over there. If you're listening over the web, I can actually, I haven't done that for a while. I should pull up the listener map and see who's online and where they're listening from. I can say hello to a few people. Oh, there's enough people listening. We got people over there in Europe. We got somebody over there in India listening. I'm not sure who they are, but anyway, a bunch of people across the U.S. here, and a few people listening in Japan. And sure. Anyway, hello. Appreciate everybody out there, and I hope you're doing well in this very interesting time in Earth history. Really, I mean, it isn't a nation-state sort of thing right now. I think everybody's facing their own challenges and difficulties right now, and I'm doing my best just to kind of keep my eye on and document it and talk about it as much as I can. I'd like to talk about it with you all. If you'd like to join the conversation here, please do so. The number's here, 573-443-7380. 573-443-8255. Once again, that's 573-443-7380 or 573-443-8255. Anything you'd like to talk about, whether it's riots in the streets, whether it's the murder of George Floyd, whether it is Dr. Sven Nyholm and the work that he's doing. Maybe you want to talk about the conversation we had earlier today. Maybe it's something unrelated. Whatever it is, please feel free and give me a call at 573-443-7380 or 443-8255, okay? All right, in the meantime, I will start at the top of my list here on the Radio Orbit forum, and I will go through some of the news stories that we have. The top one is something I just posted at the beginning of the show, and it's a new paper that has been released just in the last week or two by Dr. Gregor Woldring. And Dr. Woldring, of course, was on the program a few months ago, and he's a remarkable gentleman. And he has written a paper now called COVID-19, Its Aftermath, and Disabled People. What is the connection to ethics? Very interesting paper. Well, there's a whole bunch of things here that I'm sort of not going to go into. But anyway, it's more of an academic article, and I think if you're interested in it, you should check it out. It's COVID-19, Its Aftermath, and Disabled People, a new paper on the web from Gregor Woldring, and you can read that on the Radio Orbit forum, okay? Then I put a comment up last night, and I was watching online, and I am again right now, watching different cities and the demonstrations and protests, and in some cases riots that were occurring all around the country. And I'm doing it again right now. Looks like Minneapolis is still, there's quite a bit going on there. Portland, Oregon, or is it Portland, Maine? I'm not sure. It says Portland, but we'll have to check that out. Providence, Rhode Island. I may turn the audio on at some point here if I get the courage. San Diego, California. Providence, Rhode Island, I mentioned. Milwaukee, Washington, D.C. So still quite a bit of unrest out there. And, you know, the response, all of it is just absolutely appalling. What happened to Mr. Floyd was absolutely disgusting and appalling. And those officers should have been arrested, in my opinion. All of them. The three that we're watching and the and of course the one who was putting his weight and his knee on that man's neck. The response has been frightening, and in some cases appropriate, in some cases not so much. I do understand the frustration and the anger that comes from these types of events. I don't think that destroying private property and people's businesses and things like that is the right thing to do, though. I know sometimes things just get out of hand. But the whole situation is just really unbelievable. And then, of course, you have the police response, which is becoming more and more militarized. I mean, gosh, it's frightening, to see the military presence and the equipment and the just the sort of mindset, attitude. Gosh, I don't know. All right, Portland, Oregon. Looks like there. Las Vegas, Nevada. Anyway, again, if you'd like to talk about it, love to hear your thoughts. 573-443-7380. 573-443-8255. Just heartbreaking, all this stuff. On top of this freaking pandemic, right? And this is also a thing. I'm watching the live feed right now from many of these different cities, and I mean, why did we all stay in our homes for 3 months? And now in all of the big cities, really in all of the big cities, you have huge groups of people, certainly not paying any attention to so-called social distancing. I suppose some of them are wearing masks, some of them, many of them not. Of course, with the masks, we ought to know by now, their effect is questionable. Unless you have a real good one and it's fitted properly, that's the only way you're really protected. This stuff can enter from your ears, from your eyes, all that. So anyway, it seems that that the COVID-19 pandemic may also see a bump now. We'll have to see what the situation looks like in a couple, 3 or 4 weeks, if there's a major spike in COVID infection and hospitalization and death because of some of the interaction that's happening over the last few days in many of these large protests. Anyway, absolutely crazy. And even here in Colombia, I was out on Friday afternoon and just getting off work, and certainly the largest march/protest that I've ever witnessed since I've lived here in Colombia, and I've been here nearly 20 years, was taking place. Absolutely peaceful, and people of all shapes and sizes and colors and creeds marching together, and all the way down around Broadway, I guess down around 8th, maybe 7th, and by the county building and by the city building there, and then over to the back by the columns and the big park back there. But lots and lots of people, and many of them, very unhappy. Now there is also, an element of people that are just troublemakers, and they revel in this type of stuff, and it's really hard to classify who they are. There are all kinds of different stories about who it might be. I'm sure there are all kinds of different provocateurs, as they say. We know some of them are even authorities. The cops have done it in the past. I remember back in Seattle, 1998, at the what was that? That major protest during the, I forget. There was a big economic forum or something going on in Seattle back in the late 90s, and anyway, it was crazy, and the police and some of the intelligence services and agents for them were playing the provocateurs and making trouble, and then arresting other people. So, but that's not all of it. There's certainly an element of that, I think, and the great majority of this, I believe, is authentic. There's certainly some that isn't. I'm certain of it, but I think for the most part it's authentic. I know some people say that that it's all being organized and it's being put on by the radical left, and I don't know, maybe some of that. I know there are organizations that will pay protesters to, but they're not paying this many people, I don't think. So I don't know. If you have a comment on that, I'd be glad to hear it. But in my opinion, I think for the most part, this stuff is authentic. Certainly, you're going to have a small percentage of people that are involved in it for other reasons other than the authenticity of the protests. You have people that are just looking to loot, and looking to riot just for fun, and that's going on as well, and fire starting and who knows what. It doesn't take a lot, though. It doesn't take a whole lot of people to make a whole lot of trouble. And it's ironic because in the police business, the same thing sort of goes, that you can have the great majority of police on your force be good men and women that do respect people for who they are, not what they look like. And they're fair. But only a small percentage of bad cops can create a whole lot of trouble for a whole lot of people. I remember, I'm paraphrasing, but there's an old Chris Rock bit where he talks about some jobs, you all need to be really good at it. You can't have this, a few bad apples. Imagine if we had that sort of attitude with airline pilots. Most of the time I fly the plane pretty well, but once in a while I don't. I just crash the thing into the side of a mountain. Well, same thing with cops. We need all good cops, just like we need all good pilots, and that's a far cry and a difficult bill to fill. I get it, but it doesn't change what the need is. Now, whether we get it or not, and whether protests in the streets, and I'm watching looting going on right now in Providence, Rhode Island. Anyway, some of this stuff is not helping the cause, and some of it is, and it's just mayhem. And I guess we're seeing a lot of pent up anxiety, frustration, anger, rage, even among many of these people, and it may also have been affected by the fact that people have been sort of pent up in their own homes for months now. That can't be helping. Everyone was dying to get out anyway. And so, anyway, Providence, Rhode Island, geez, that looks like the place tonight, at least one of them. Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. Interesting. Whitefish Bay, where's that? I think it's up by Madison. Maybe that's why it's a big university town. St. Louis. Looks pretty quiet in St. Louis. Columbia, Missouri here, pretty quiet tonight. I've seen a few sirens and heard some police action a little bit earlier, but it's now about 1:40 in the morning and not much going on here in Columbia, Missouri. If you have other reports, please feel free to give me a call. Once again, 573-443-7380 or 443-8255. I'd love to hear what your experiences and observations are. All right, in the meantime, what else do we have here? Oh, I was saying I was thinking about that old the Guess Who song, and I don't even know what the name of it is, but I know the lyric that says, stop here, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. All right, so that song, there's a line in that song that goes like this: what a field day for the heat, 1,000 people in the street. And man, it really hit me strong last night. And I was watching some protesters and demonstrators confronting police officers in Philadelphia. And the things that the protesters were saying to the police officers made me think that the protesters didn't realize who they were talking to or the kind of people that they're talking to. Appeals to their humanity isn't going to work. Trying to make those types of people feel guilty about what they're doing is not going to work, and that's what these folks were trying to do. You got to understand that, especially on the front lines like that, the great majority of those men, again, the majority of them are men. I don't know if there are very many women officers that are working on the streets, especially in the real dangerous areas. But at any rate, most of them want to be there. Most of them are former military. Most of them are bored stiff, and they're just looking for a fight, and they love it. This is a great, great, fun opportunity for them, and they'll do as much as they're allowed to do. They will take as much action as they are allowed to by their commanding officers, and they are very good at taking orders. They'll do what they're allowed to do. And let me tell you, we haven't seen everything yet, and I hope we don't, because they have non-lethal weapons, and this is an interesting term, right? But anyway, they have non-lethal weapons at their disposal that have not been presented to the public yet in this particular case. And I'm talking about sonic weapons. I'm talking about microwave weapons. And these are all things that are in the news. You can just Google non-lethal weapons. And many of these police forces are outfitted with this stuff yet, and they have not been using it. Now, if they start, that'll be a whole nother story, or a whole nother chapter in the story. I'll tell you, speaking of chapters, if you're going to be studying history down the road, be ready for the 2020 chapter to be a long one. Incredible. 5 months into it now. We're June 1st now. 7 months to go, with an election coming up in about 6, I guess. 5.5, whatever. Okay. All right, so what a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street. It's a dangerous situation. For the people that are out there protesting, it can be very dangerous. And for the cops, too. It's just not cool at all. And we really got to do better at figuring out, how to resolve some of these problems. All right, China evacuating a bunch of students from the USA. In the meantime, there's sort of a war of words that's continuing between ourselves and the Chinese regarding COVID-19. And you can find all kinds of information about COVID-19 at the Radio Orbit Forum. The world's largest all-electric airplane flew for 28 minutes the other day. This is a record for a passenger airplane. And the guys on Tech Radio were actually talking about this a little bit earlier, actually yesterday in the afternoon on KOPN's Tech Radio. That goes off at 6 o'clock every Monday. But anyway, the guys were talking about this. It was a public demonstration on Thursday of an all-electric aircraft. There's a company called Magnix, or Magni-X, I'm not sure, I think it's Magnix, which is manufacturing these planes. And they had a wonderful day up there in Washington. And this is a sort of a modified Cessna 208B, a Grand Caravan that has been modified with electric motors and was able to fly for about 30 minutes or so. Now, there's a whole bunch to the story, and the plane is nowhere nearly as capable as a traditionally fueled aircraft, but it is an historic flight. And if they could somehow up the battery power and lower the weight, then they could see some more success with electric airplanes. Right now, it's just the fuel to weight ratio is just much better for jet fuel than it is for battery power. There's John Malkovich talking about Space Force and about the toxic outrage culture. He was talking about comedy and about how difficult it is for a comedian in these particular times. What else do we have here? This is going to have to be saved for next week, but there's a YouTube video that I'm going to have to edit a little bit and play the audio for you, but it's about contact tracing. And if you don't know what that is, you can learn more about it next week, but you've probably heard about it in the news. It's basically trying to connect the dots when it comes to people who have been infected with either COVID-19 or anything else for that matter, and using either personal tracking or electronic tracking, trying to find out all of the contacts that any particular person has had over a particular period of time. And it's frightening. So we'll talk about contact tracing next week. Here's an article that I only have to read the headline for. Unexplained phenomena keep suggesting the universe isn't what we thought. Well, that's true. Nice long article that's not necessary. Just the title, that's all that's necessary for that one. There's another story about COVID, the fact that there is a team in India that discovered that there is a particular bacterial pathogen that seems to coexist with the coronavirus COVID-19, and this particular coexistence could be very significant in the fatalities. In other words, COVID-19 cases that also have an additional bacterial infection that's called chlamydia pneumonia could make it significantly worse. And they've done a study in India that shows that that is the case. Again, you can read more details on the Radio Orbit forum. Improve your critical thinking with this cheat sheet. Yeah, you can go to my website there, click on the Radio Orbit forum, and go get a cheat sheet to improve your critical thinking. Now more than ever, oh my God, we need critical thinking. Really do. Really helpful right now for everybody. We need it, all right? Nursing homes and assisted living facilities account for 43% of COVID-19 deaths. So yeah, certainly many of the elderly and immunocompromised and those with pre-existing conditions are definitely more at risk than healthier individuals. There's a study from J.P. Morgan that says the lockdowns didn't really have much of an effect on the course of the pandemic. Of course, there are plenty of other studies that say that it did. We have nothing but conflicting and contradictory information coming at us from pretty much all angles at this point. So I don't really know what's true or not. Time will tell with regard to COVID. It's already, it's been a few weeks since many states have opened up. There certainly hasn't been too much of a spike, if any, in Georgia nor Florida. Missouri's been open now for about a month. And we've had a few more cases here in Boone County and around, but to be honest, they're doing a lot more testing. We're really not seeing many more hospitalizations, and we haven't seen any more deaths. Maybe it will come back and give us another lesson. Maybe it will lighten up. Maybe it will mutate into a less virulent and dangerous virus. Maybe it'll get worse. We don't know yet. It hasn't been around long enough for us to tell. So maybe the warm weather will knock it down. We'll have to see what happens in the fall. But anyway, this whole experiment with thousands of people marching in the streets, that's also going to be an interesting data point, or a number of data points with regard to this particular viral pandemic that we're all having to deal with as well. Okay. A compilation of mind-bending visual effects and optical illusions. I like stuff like that. I love optical illusions, and I found a really cool example of some of that stuff on YouTube, and you can check that out on the website. There's Sky News. There's some people in Australia talking about coronavirus, that it may have been a cell culture experiment gone wrong. This is the angle that coronavirus is actually a manufactured bug or a manufactured pathogen. Interestingly, the Americans have accused the Chinese of making this coronavirus COVID-19 bug, literally manufacturing it at the level 4 biolab in Wuhan, China, which of course the American CDC and the WHO have their tentacles all over. It's a very, very weird situation and scary. But we also have our own labs here in the United States, and there's one in Fort Detrick, Maryland, which has been doing extremely nasty work for many, many years. And the Chinese have accused us that that we made it and that it was deployed over there. So if either of these perspectives are accurate, then we're in worse trouble than we thought, because then we're probably going to have a war on our hands in addition to a pandemic and a social, cultural crisis. So, but I did tell you earlier that there are no asteroids that are coming. So for now, that's cool. All right. There's an interesting video about Cuba. Psychiatrists writing 86% more prescriptions for psychotropic drugs during the lockdown. So this is a problem of unintended consequences when you remove people's livelihood and when you put them in places where they don't want to be for long periods of time. They have negative responses, and they react negatively sometimes to those stimuli. And in some cases, they go deeper into addiction. They go deeper into abuse. They maybe start up a new addiction, and they may just get depressed and just feel bad. And that is extremely understandable right now. And, people really having a rough time. And clearly they are, because psychiatrists are writing a lot more antidepressant prescriptions. Edward Snowden, we played that last week. We've got a couple of things here that you can go check out for yourself, but we're getting pretty close on time here. So I'm going to leave the rest of the news to you. Once again, you can go to the Radio Orbit forum at www.mikehagan, MikeHagan, MikeHagan.com. And from there, just click on the button that says Radio Orbit Forum, and then you can go check out all that stuff yourself. There's all kinds of stories up there, hundreds and hundreds of them that go back at least a couple of years. And it's a real cool archive of information as well. That's kind of the way that I use it. I like to have it as sort of like an old archive. And if I think of something that I want to refer to and I can't quite remember, there's a good chance that I put it up there on the forum, and then I can just go do a little search for it and usually pull it up. I use Twitter the same way, kind of. So I'll tell you that you can get a hold of me on Twitter if you'd like. Once again, my name is just Mike Hagan, and most of my stuff online is just my name. Of course, the website, MikeHagan.com, and at Twitter, I'm just Mike Hagan. I'll mention our guest this evening once again, Sven Nyholm. That's SvenNyholm, Sven Nyholm. That's his Twitter address as well. And you can connect with Dr. Nyholm through my website from here on out. Okay, thanks again for listening to the program. I appreciate all of you out there, and I hope you're doing okay. Maybe we'll get you on the horn next week. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the show next week. I've got a couple of ideas. I had some stuff planned sort of before the COVID break, but much of that kind of fell through the cracks, and I'm sort of just getting reorganized now. So if you've got suggestions, you're welcome to send those to me. Lots of stuff going to be coming your way one way or the other, and we'll have great music as well. If you do have anyone you'd like to hear on the program, certainly feel free to get a hold of me, and you can do that once again on the website or via Twitter or via Instagram. If you have music, if you have art, poetry, advice, whatever it is that you might like to share, please feel free to do that, and I appreciate hearing from y'all. All right, I will be back with you next week. Stick around for Eric P's Sound Legacy. He'll be coming at you here, so get ready for some cool tunes. That'll be going on until 5:30 in the a.m., where we will switch it to classical with Morning Air. All right, my name is Mike Hagan, and you've been listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia 89.5 FM. We're going to hear one more on the way out here from our featured musicians of the evening. They're called Yin Yin. I dig them. This is called The Rabbit That Hunts Tigers. It's Radio Orbit. Be cool to yourselves. Be cool to other people. We'll catch you all next week.